Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of Cruel and Beautiful, Eye of the Dragon, Rabbit Hole, and King Dio. Yakuza developer Nagoshi has been in the news quite a lot lately. There's been a lot of discussion regarding his anti-Nintendo stances, his design philosophies, his inability to stop shitting on his audience. Recently he shit on Puyo Puyo players. I'm sorry, not a Puyo Puyo fan. His shitting on Puyo Puyo players. His treatment of Nintendo fans, the weird things he said, allowing Sakura Wars to bomb, and now most recently, we've heard rumors that he's planning on leaving Sega and joining some Chinese company, excuse me. Lots of discussion around Nagoshi right now, and very interesting that this is happening, because I myself was considering actually going to make a video about Nagoshi, because it feels like, this is another Yoko Taro situation, right? I've said this a lot about Nagoshi, but maybe not quite to the same extent as I've said about Nier Automata and Yoko Taro. But Nagoshi is a one-hit wonder who's really only relevant for one thing, and that is putting Yakuza 0 on PS4, back when nobody really had any games to play. Because Yakuza 0 was a somewhat long action RPG, something like 40 hours long if you're going to 100% it. A lot of people were able to sink a lot of time into it, and were able to hype it up and keep it, give the Yakuza franchise more life in the West. And as a result of that, for a long while, people were fanatical about Yakuza games. The remakes were hyped up, 6 was hyped up, 7 was hyped up, but gradually people began to realize that Yakuza was the same thing over and over and over again. So repetitive and derivative, in fact, that even completely changing the core gameplay in Yakuza 7 didn't really do anything to revitalize it. Yakuza is clearly on the decline. I've been saying this for years, and seeing Nagoshi even considering supposedly joining a Chinese company explains a lot, I think. Being demoted clearly didn't make him happy. Being shut down by Sega clearly wasn't the way to keep him around. But I wonder, I've been meaning to bring this up for a long time. I've been meaning to talk about this. Does anyone else feel like, because Nagoshi is becoming so well known for shitting on fans of franchises that aren't his own beloved Yakuza, right? Shitting on Puyo Puyo, shitting on Super Monkey Ball fans, shitting on Nintendo fans, that it actively is hurting Sega's bottom line. I think that has to be the case. I think that's a major reason why he was demoted, and a major reason why he's in the news so much. Nobody's talking about his games. Nobody's talking about Yakuza 7. I haven't heard a single person discuss the possibility of Yakuza 8. Whether or not it's going to return to action-based combat or be another turn-based game. Nobody gives a shit. All anybody cares about when it comes to Yakuza, at this point in time, is whether or not Nagoshi is going to put it on Switch, and what ridiculous nonsense he's going to say next. Oh man, why do people like Super Monkey Ball? I don't understand the appeal, man. I made that game 20 years ago. Aren't you grown up now? Don't you want crime dramas over and over and over again? No! Understand that Super Monkey Ball was a great game. I don't... The best game he's ever produced, in fact. And seeing him constantly shit on it, constantly just adamantly refuse to acknowledge it at all, or attack its fans, it's disgraceful, honestly. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense to me. And furthermore, just the weirdness of him constantly speaking out against Nintendo, constantly speaking out against the Switch, constantly trying to shill for PlayStation. It's gotten so bad that I've seen a lot of speculation talking about what's going on behind the scenes. I've seen a lot of surprisingly red-pilled comments on the nature of Nagoshi's relationship with Sony. I've been seeing people notice that he's having dinner with Sony executives. They're making backroom deals. They're doing all this stuff, and this is of course the I've been talking about this for years, right? Like I talked about like the reality of what actually happened with Final Fantasy VII, how that was actually a backroom deal and it had nothing to do with like the hardware power of the N64, or how Nintendo was treating SquareSoft at the time. It had everything to do with Sony just throwing money at like critical people in development, and having this thing produced for PlayStation to try and sell the public on the idea of another video game platform existing, when really Nintendo should have had the monopoly from that point forward, with Sega on the way out already, and just already being stomped by the Super Nintendo. It took a multi-billion-dollar corporation to even stand a chance against Nintendo's Nintendo 64, that console generation, and all that's been happening since then. It feels like they kind of delayed the inevitable, doesn't it? Like, all these people who put everything they had into promoting PlayStation, people like Harada, people like Nagoshi, Squaresoft, Hideo Kojima, Hinafune, people who dropped everything to try and produce cool, mature games for Sony PlayStation, they're done. Like, they're not coming back. There's never going to be a restoration. And there's never going to be a return to form. There's never going to be a new classic Mega Man. 11 dropped the ball. There's never going to be a new Mega Man X. There's never going to be a new Metal Gear. There's never going to be a new Yakuza, it feels like, at this point. Like, I'm at the point now where I honestly don't feel as if Yakuza can really continue, right? Either it's going to alienate the what few fans are left, or it's just going to I don't know, continue as it is, right? Like, just this slow, gradual decline of just doing the same thing over and over and over again. Oh, by the way, I have to love, by the way, how people like Spoonie are nowhere to be found when it comes to Yakuza. Like, these are the people who spent their entire lives trying to convince people that that Mario and Nintendo were just the same thing over and over and over again, like Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, the same thing over and over and over again. When was the last time you really saw anyone bring that up about Yakuza? Someone who wasn't me, right? Someone who's dedicated themselves to pointing this stuff out. Nobody talks about PlayStation. Nobody talks about PlayStation games being monotonous, boring, and repetitive. No one talks about the lack of innovation, the lack of growth, the lack of quality. Like, none of that. Nobody cares. As long as it has its PlayStation stamp of approval, no one gives a shit. People are just going to continue pretending that everything is fine, that everything's acceptable. Like, if a major Nintendo developer was rumored to be leaving Nintendo, you would be seeing nonstop articles about it. In fact, that's kind of what happened when the F-Zero guy retired. People were bitching about, like, not getting a new F-Zero. With Nagoshi rumored being leaving, right, the news hit the news cycle, and then it was dropped immediately. Like, no one is discussing about the possibility, what this means for the future of Sega, the future of PlayStation, the future of Yakuza. Keep in mind, Yakuza is one of the very, very few franchises that these companies have left, right? Like, I think it's the only remotely, relatively popular franchise that Sega has left. Like, Sonic's never coming back. Persona, I'm sure, is going to eventually hit a decline once its audience starts hitting their 20s. Like, once their audience eventually has to get jobs. Like how much longer are we going to keep up this facade, right? Or how long are we going to keep refusing to acknowledge that these PlayStation developers, people like Nagoshi, have done nothing but drop the ball since the very beginning, right? Like, this guy was involved with Shenmue, right? This guy was heavily involved in, like, co-director for Shenmue, I think. This guy was involved with, like, botching that, making that the most expensive game ever produced, leading to Sega's collapse, right? This is the guy who dropped Super Monkey Ball, led to Sakura Wars bombing. Like, there's just been a long stream of failures following this guy. In fact, I'd go so far as to compare him to, like, the new Kojima, honestly, because of his fixation on shoving, like, Japanese actors into everything. That's another controversy I've recently become aware of. The reason they can't release Judgment in the West is because they used a famous Japanese actor whose agency will not allow him to be seen outside of Japan. I don't know what the mindset behind that is. I haven't really looked into that, but like, doesn't it show a clear lack of foresight, a clear lack of planning, a really clear sense of progression? Like, these people have no idea what they're doing. Like, their entire business model revolves around accepting bribes from Sony or Microsoft occasionally and just putting their games on these platforms for them to, like, bomb, right? They don't do well. Nobody cares about Yakuza 7. But, like, they've been sustained because of things like, say, Xbox Game Pass or these aforementioned deals, right? Like, it's ridiculous. It is downright absurd how long this is going on, how long this has been going down on, and only just now that it's beginning to get called out. Because of course this has been going on for like decades, right? This isn't a new thing. It isn't something that's like unknown, right? Because there are people there are people out there like myself who understand what's going on and want to fight back against it. But we're reaching the point now where I think people like Nagoshi can't continue with what they're doing. I think Sony is becoming increasingly irrelevant, especially in Japan. They're not going to be able to hand out bribes like they used to. It's becoming like more and more obvious that the primary method of playing video games everywhere is Nintendo Switch. And with that kind of mindset, and with that in mind, it's becoming more and more ridiculous seeing these kind of people refuse to develop for Nintendo consoles. Seeing them like constantly move goalposts, constantly make excuses. They can only do this so much before people start really, really fighting back. And I think by the next Tekken, by the next Yakuza, it's really going to start impacting their numbers, right? Like I do think it's really going to start like hitting them hard. And in a lot of ways, it kind of already has. Like Sakura Wars, right? Sakura Wars has been replaced by Fire Emblem, like being the strategy RPG with dating sims, right? Like Fire Emblem has basically taken over Sakura Wars' niche and done it better than they ever could. What they should have done in that situation was put Sakura Wars on Fire Emblem, on Nintendo consoles, and say like, yeah, here's a something similar to Fire Emblem that Fire Emblem fans would be into. But instead, what they tried to do was try to make it PlayStation exclusive and try to make it like a big deal, like try to, you know. They made the main game PlayStation exclusive, and they tried to make a mobile tie-in, both of which bombed, and it cost them like several $1 million. I don't know the exact numbers. I haven't kept up with it, but things like that over and over and over again. It is getting impossible to take Yakuza developer Nagoshi seriously. Sega is on the way out, and soon, hopefully, that will lead to PlayStation leaving the console industry as well.